My name is John Bowers, and I'm here to introduce one of a series of programs entitled Great Men in Medicine. The programs are jointly sponsored by the National Library of Medicine, the National Medical Audio-Visual Center, and Alpha Omega Alpha, which is the National Honor Medical Society. The programs are made possible in part by a gift to Alpha Omega Alpha from Professors David and Beatrice Siegel. The aim of the program is to record on videotape the career, the philosophy, and the scientific achievements of some of our great men in medicine. The great man for today is Professor Charles Huggins, who for a number of years was a professor in the Department of Surgery at the University of Chicago. For his research in relation to endocrinology and cancer, Dr. Huggins was awarded a Nobel Prize in 1966. He will be talking with Professor Leon Jacobson, who is Dean of the University of Chicago Medical School.
Charlie, you know, it's been said that I was born in a snowdrift in North Dakota, and I always think of Canada as being very cold. Where were you born?
I was born in Halifax.
Is it like North Dakota?
Halifax is the capital city of Nova Scotia. It's a seaport, and the excitement there was the coming and going of ocean liners with an occasional shipwreck. Otherwise, it was peaceful and tranquil. We had the great advantage of the Canadian educational system with a union of formalistic training from England plus advanced liberal education from John Dewey of the University of Chicago. We had a happy life, and the first thing that happened to me of significance was in high school. A group of 10 boys, all friends, decided that we would take the same foreign languages in high school together. And we put the languages in a hat. We decided whatever group of languages came out, we would take those in high school. And to our astonishment, it came out Latin and Greek. So Latin and Greek it was. And we were guided in this course by a pretty young girl named Nora Power, the teacher, who was fascinated about Latin and Greek. Then, age 16, I proceeded to a small college in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, called Acadia. And there it was idyllic in the land of apple orchards and quiet, serene, academic surroundings.
Were there any of the teachers that you had there? Always reminded that everyone seems to remember some teacher that had some real important effect on where they went from college. Did anyone there seem to affect you in that way?
I had two wonderful teachers. One is Professor of Classics, who instructed us in Latin and Greek, and another was a professor of chemistry, a young man just starting, Dr. Hill. And he had me engage in a research problem with him on the law of mass action. So for 3 years, I was busy and happy reading Latin and Greek poetry in the mornings and doing physical chemistry in the afternoons, and I was really entranced by all of that.
Well, was he the one you think that got you to go into medicine, or did you do that all on your own?
At the end of 3 years, the question was, should I become a classicist or a physical chemist or just what? and I thought that might be well to try medicine. So knowing that I would not be accepted at Harvard Medical School, I applied, and to my astonishment, I was accepted. And then in 1920, I proceeded there.
How did you get in without having German? Since you were studying Greek and Latin.
Harvard Medical School at that time thought that they were a little parochial and ingrown, and they wanted some foreign students. So I went to Harvard as quote, a foreign student. Now the Canadians in the United States, they don't like to be called Americans, but they certainly don't want to be called foreign. But anyway, I was a foreign student, and they overlooked a few little things like lack of familiarity with modern French and German.
Well, when you went to medical school, you were age, what, 8, 19, 20?
Well, I was lucky. I went to medical school age 18, having graduated BA at Acadia. The reason I could do that was I went to Columbia University in New York in the summers and got off a lot of organic chemistry in the heat of New York City.
Well, then they finally let you in and into Harvard. Did you really get in without being on, on probation or anything?
There was no probation as far as I knew. At the end of 1 month, one of the classmates, just before the anatomy examination, said, fellas, there's no need to study. We're a highly select student group. They wouldn't dare flunk us. Anyway, we took the examination, and the next day, Norman Elton was on his way home. He was the one who said it was not necessary to study.
Did he ever get back in?
What we had at that time was a wonderful group of professors. The mystique of Harvard Medical School is rather simple. They have these 5 beautiful marble buildings on the Longwood campus. Second, at that time they had wonderful professors such as Cushing and Walter B. Cannon and Otto Folin and Hans Zinzer. Again and again, the professor would come in to the lecture to the students, and he would say, this is a very great honor for me to lecture to the students today. This is the only medical school where I ever heard a professor introduce a lecture to undergraduate medical students in that way. But everything at Harvard was designed primarily, first and foremost, with teaching of medical students in mind. First, there will be great laboratories for the students. Then, if there's something left over, there can be research laboratories for the professors. But there, I developed a great love affair with medicine. I thought medicine was just wonderful. It was vocation, avocation, religion, profession. It was a combination of sadness, a chance to serve, large amounts of comedy. Dollar sign didn't enter into it. We were all young priests of medicine, and we all felt great studying in these marble buildings with professors who considered it an honor to lecture to us.
When you finished your first 2 years, Charlie, and then you went into the clinical area, that was...
We did.
Yes. And where did you take most of your clinical training in your 3rd and 4th year?
There were 3 large clinical hospitals, but one was research-minded, and that was the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital. This was the home of Harvey Cushing and Elliot Cutler, so I did most of my work there. And we learned things. We had not only research studies on kidney diseases going on, brain tumors and all, but practical things such as bandaging. And I loved a course of bandaging, 2 hours a week for 6 weeks.
Do you think you did more in the way of what is commonly called scut work in those days than students do today?
We did plenty of service. The students often were assistants in hospitals. You could go to a hospital, say at 6 o'clock, and give ether anesthesia from 6 till 8, and you would get $1.50 in your breakfast for doing that. That, in a sense, was scut work, but we learned a lot by giving drop ether anesthesia while the professor of gynecology performed what they called a round trip.
Now, you mentioned a couple of the great surgeons with whom you had experience as a student. What about the people in medicine at that time?
One of the great professors was Richard Cabot, and he was famous for the Clinical Pathological Conference. And he and an elderly chauffeur would drive up to the Peter Bent Brigham every Friday afternoon and in a Stanley steamer. And the chauffeur would leave the steamer on. A steamer is driven by water, and he would keep the flame under the steamer while Dr. Cabot went in to give his clinical pathological conferences. And then once a year, Dr. Cabot would have a conference at which any student could ask him any question, provided it was submitted in writing before. It was mandatory that he would answer the questions. Richard Cabot was our most distinguished internist, and he was the great advocate of complete honesty in cancer. For example, if a student, if a patient asked him, do I have a fatal disease? He would say yes. And when will I die? He'd say soon. Things like that. But at the Cabot conference once a week, or once a year, where there was an answer to the students' questions, they were answered in complete honesty. For example, the first question is, give a good recipe for insomnia. Second question, I would like to have your favorite remedy for cough. The third question, what do you think of your brother Hugh? And answer, I respect him admirably, but really I don't like him. Question number 4, do you believe in having intercourse for fun? And answer, absolutely not.
You know,
The answer, the logical answer to this was, he never had any children.
I see. Well, you know, as I think of the experience that you were having at that time, I was, of course, just a child, but when I went to medical school, which was in '35, then, of course, we were reading. Most of our textbooks were written by the people who were your teachers. And now let me ask about, let's say, pediatrics. Was there anyone in pediatrics or OBGYN, for example, that
We thought all of our professors were wonderful.
who do you think influenced
was,
you the most?
Pardon?
Who do you think influenced you the most there?
I thought
Good or bad?
I thought Harvey Cushing had a great influence. Harvey Cushing was this. He was intoxicated with medicine. If he operated all day, he would work in the evenings at a sitting desk. If he'd been administrating all day at his desk, in the evening he would have a standing desk.
Well, then, so finally you came to the end of the 4 years of medical school, and what did you plan to do at that time? What did you want to do?
As a congenital Easterner who thought that Roxbury was the near West, I thought it would be well to see something of the United States. So a very romantic name was Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I came to the University of Michigan. I was largely influenced by the romantic name. Ann Arbor conjured up visions of beautiful girls in long white dresses, in swings, in grape arbors. And I went there. Beautiful girls they had, and I married one of them. Long white dresses they had. Swings there were, but grape arbors, none.
Well, you know, when you went to Michigan, even though you've already admitted that a surgeon was in a sense, your idea when you were in medical school, you went into internal medicine. How did that happen?
I thought that whereas the most colorful people in medicine were the surgeons, I thought that internal medicine was the intellectual discipline. And
of course, I agree with you.
well, it was so pleasant. They had, in the Department of Medicine where I was intern, Ann Arbor, the sub-pop system. The sub-pop is Massachusetts General Hospital terminology. The first 4 months of medical internship, the intern in those days was sub-pop. Namely, he did the bloods and the urine analysis, stools, sputum, things like that. So I was assigned as sub-pop to the medical ward, consisting of 25 gentlemen in a long room. There I had to do laboratory work. So I said, well, there's no way out of this. Let me see if I can discover something that the great men can't discover by discussion of clinical findings. So what can I learn from laboratory work, or is it all an exercise in futility? This was a decisive point in my career. For example, the first case was a boy with edema of the conjunctiva, and this was alleged to be due to phenobarbital intoxication. He had pain in his eyes when he moved his eyes laterally. On doing white count, the leukocyte count was 18,000, and 95% of the cells were eosinophils. Quick, what is the cause of eosinophils of this magnitude? One of the answers was trichoniasis. So I quickly went back to the young man and said, have you had a raw pork sandwich lately? He said, I did. I was at the Illinois game where Red Grange ran away and made 4 touchdowns in the first 10 minutes, something that's never been done against mighty Michigan before or since. And after I had a hot pork sandwich, which was rather raw, I said, boy, I know what's wrong with you. He said, I don't care about the Latin name. Will I live? I said, you will. And the name is trichoniasis, and you must do me this favor. When we have rounds tomorrow, don't say anything about the disease. So the great men came in on grand rounds, long white coat, and there was a profound dissertation on phenobarbital allergy. And at the end of that time, I was standing at the periphery. I said, the white count is 18,000. And they looked at each other. I said, differential 95% eosinophils. And the professor said, and walked on.
Is that what made you go into surgery?
Not exactly, but that kindled my interest in laboratory work. There was a woman there, wife of the dean of the law school, and she had intractable cystitis. And I found in her urine tubercle bacilli. And I mentioned this to the professor of, she was referred to the professor of surgery. Tuberculous kidney was removed with prompt cure within 10 days. Say that made a great hit because the surgeon had been looking after her for a couple of years, getting steadily worse. So he said to me, how about changing the surgery? I said, well, let me think it over. So I thought it over about 1 hour, and then I called him up and I said, I'd be glad to be a surgical intern.
The head of surgery at that time was Dr. Collar, right?
Dr. Collar was a man, age 35, a magnetic man, handsome as a movie star, a technical genius. Age 35, I thought, might be a little too old to entrust my career to a surgeon age 35. But then he seemed to know his business, so I accepted. And then for 2 years, it was great technique. This was a technical school. we learned to operate very, very safe. Safety was paramount. But then we also learned to not waste any time. So our operations were done very, very safe and very, very fast. A surgical operation is like art. It's done before the operative seance. It's done in the mind. One visualizes each and every step that the surgeon will take. And if you know the approach and have every possibility that might arise, thought out carefully, you can proceed, provided you have some manual dexterity.
Well, now, of course, you really had gotten interested in laboratory work, as you said, because of the problem of diagnosis and so on. And then, and you changed from internal medicine. It's been said that you were really a neurologist at Michigan. I don't know whether that's true or not. And then you had your 3 years really at Michigan.
Right.
And how did you happen then to come to the University of Chicago?
We learned surgery at the University of Michigan by doing thyroidectomy. This was the goiter belt, and it was terrible. We would have a waiting list of 150 people who needed thyroidectomy. And Fred Collar, plus 2 assistants, one of which was myself, we would do 4 thyroidectomies a day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. That would be 16 a week. We would do these between 8 and 10, and then we would start and do our interesting operations. But there were these great nodular thyroid, exophthalmic goiter, which was endemic in those days too. And it was such a big problem. I proposed to Professor Collar during my last year as intern that we organized an institute for the study of thyroid physiology and pathology. And he said, no, thank you. He said, it's too big a venture. But by that time, I was thinking nothing is too big for somebody with training in Latin and Greek and all that. So I said, all right, I'll go some other place. So I heard that there was a new medical school to be opened in October 1927 at the University of Chicago, and I thought I would go there for 1 year. The reason was I thought it'd be interesting to see how a new medical school would start where there had been none before. And it had a fascinating idea behind it, namely the full-time system. Third, it was stated, no man shall teach unless he also does research. If you want to have the privilege of teaching, you must do your problem. So I thought, well, things are pretty well understood, except for nodules in the thyroid gland, but I'll go down and see what it's like. So I went there, and to spend 1 year, then to practice surgery, Kalamazoo, the rest of my life. I went newly married with the world oyster, no money, and I ran into an entirely new and thoughtful environment created largely by Dallas Phemister, the surgeon, Franklin McLean, physician, and a few other great men.
Well, actually, Carlson was there too. Although he wasn't the surgeon, he was in the medical school.
Carlson was there. Dr. Wells was present, and dominating my area was Dallas Phemister, age 44.
I've often heard you tell me, well, in fact, you've told me over the years, because you happen to be one of those professors who always seem to be interested in young people, and you continuously have young students and house officers to your house, and I can remember going to your house many, many years ago, and you were telling me about those first years at the University of Chicago when you were really starting to see patients. Now, I would like to, in the first place, you were a general surgeon when you left Ann Arbor, is that correct?
Yes,
Then how come you became a urologist when you got to Chicago?
It is said that with a classical education, all you need is 2 or 3 weeks and you can learn any specialty. For example, I was led to believe that every place I was great, wonderful. So I had wonderful esprit de corps. Harvard was great, Acadia was great, and Michigan was great. So they said to me, won't you come down and and do urology? I said, I never had any training in it, but I will I'll read a textbook quite carefully, underline it, and then I took 2 weeks off and I learned cystoscopy, and I showed up in the Billings Hospital as urologist in chief. Now, the number of patients I had the first month was 0, and then after 6 weeks, another patient came. The first patient came, and he really received privatissimos care. But this went on, and I got started on a wonderful problem, which was entrancing. And this problem came from Dallas Phemister. With a young staff, entirely inexperienced, with his professor of urology, a gentleman of age 26, who'd had 2 weeks training in the field. We had formal united meetings of Department of Surgery. Tuesday, surgical pathology. Thursday, research seminars. Saturday, clinical show of patients. And my doom was sealed in the unlikely locale of surgical pathology. We sat there on stools because if you fell asleep, you'd fall off. So we stayed awake. And Dallas Phemister told of a fascinating experiment he'd read about in producing bone. It seems if you cut off top of the bladder and sew in there a patch of fibrous tissue, fascia lata, it's watertight and heals.
Right. Now, I wanted just to ask you, because I want to go into more detail on research aspect, but in a sense, you then came into kind of a new world, because here was a situation in which you came to an institution which, as you've already said, it would be dedicated to research, teaching, and patient care. And could you say a few words more about this concept in the sense of what attracted you about the whole thing, and did it affect your, let's say, the rest of your life?
Having graduated from Michigan postgraduate training course, residency in surgery, we thought there was only one way to do things. There at Chicago, we learned there were new methods. The entire conversation was different. Pathogenesis of disease, novelty of disease. We had no patients. There were 4 students and 30 professors. The students and professors were one happy family. I knew each and every person in that Billings hospital, the cook, the engineer, the fireman who stoked the furnace, the dishwasher, the head professor, the dean, everybody. And the 4 students, we would make rounds, and it was so interesting. Our students at Chicago have always been a distinguished group. The 4 students we had either had PhDs or were in training for combined PhD, MD training.
Well, that was what I wanted to say. The atmosphere which you came into then, after all of this background which you've so beautifully presented, you're now in a new setting and prepared to make the next big step in your life, to go from not only from patient care, but into the area of research as well as patient care. And I think I'd like to...
That came about in a logical way. As I say, here I was, a professor of urology with 0 patients. I went to clinic Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 o'clock and sat there till 4, hoping that some unsuspecting gentleman or lady would come in seeking professional urological advice. But no one did for session after session, so I read. But what was to be done in the free time, I quickly came to the conclusion that nothing was to be accomplished by reading. Reading is the death of ideas. You read ex post hoc, after the experiment, in order not to be ungenerous to predecessors, but you never read in advance. So what was to be done? Was I to collect postage stamps? So I decided I better get some experiments started.
That's when you decided to go into the laboratory.
But it was because there wasn't enough to do otherwise, and I didn't feel like loafing.
Okay, Charlie, how about making me a cup of coffee?
That would be great.
Okay.